for coming out. It's nice to see actual people instead of, this event has been a long time in planning. 2 years, has it maybe? Because of COVID, and we really didn't want to do a virtual event because we have the fabulous Professor Latinx here. Anyway, so this is the annual Department of English, annual in normal times, Department of English Hermanns lecture. So I have to tell you a little bit about the benefactor for this lecture series. Rudolf Hermanns was a traveling plant seed salesman for Fred C. Gluckner Company, and he lived a reclusive life for 22 years in a small apartment near UTA. And when he came to the US from Germany, he had less than $200 in his pocket, but upon his death in April 1985, he left a $2 to $3 million estate to UTA. And in 1991, the Rudolf Hermanns UTA Endowment Fund for Excellence established the Rudolf Hermanns Endowment, Department of English Lecture Series. And our lecture series is an annual event that brings notable scholars to the UTA campus for lectures, workshops, and panel discussions. So, we are very lucky that the plant seed salesman, gave us his very well saved money. So I would just have a few people I'd like to thank before I introduce our speaker today. First, I'd like to thank Sarah Shelton, Dr. Sarah Shelton, who helped me with all of the media, the social media, and she designed the fabulous poster, so I wanted to give a shout out to Sarah. Also wanted to thank the English Department's Administrative Assistant, Yael Sasli, who was great with organizing arrangements. And a big thank you to Cedric May, videographer extraordinaire, who at the last minute had pulled all of the tech together, as only Cedric can do. So a big thank you to him. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. So Dr. Frederick Aldema, aka Professor Latinx, is the Jacob and Francis Sanger Massacre Chair in the Humanities and affiliate faculty in the Radio, TV, Film department at the University of Texas, Austin. He's also an adjunct professor and distinguished university professor at The Ohio State University. He is an award-winning author of over 48 books. I'm just gonna let that settle for a second. I do not know how that's even possible. But apparently it's possible, so we're just slackers. He has received an International Latino Book Award and an Eisner for his book Latinx Superheroes in Mainstream Comics. He is editor and co-editor of 9 academic press book series, including editor of Latinographics that publishes Latinx comics. He is the creator of the first documentary on the history of Latinx superheroes and founder and director of UT's Latinx Pop Lab. He's the author of several children's books, including The Adventures of Chupacabra Charlie, Joanna couldn't read, which is published in English and Spanish, and the just released, yes, Con Papa with Papa. So without further ado, let me introduce Professor Aldema.
Thank you. Huge honor and pleasure, and actually this is my first public event in 2+ years. Yay! It's also, I know we have a lot going on in Texas these days and a lot that we have to kind of pull our gloves off and get in the fight with, but I love being here in Texas. So thank you for opening your state to me. So I want to ask out of the gate, I heard a couple of people telling me some shows that they've been watching, things that have caught their eye. So I want to know, like lately, what Latinx pop culture you've experienced. What TV shows, music, anything that's like been, right? Anybody? Encanto. Yeah, okay, so tell us why. What was that something that you just loved?
I mean, yeah, I'm Hispanic, so I love that representation.
Yeah.
And it's Lin-Manuel Miranda, so what's not to love?
Yeah. Yeah, and that one of them has been like #1 on the Billboard, right? Yeah. We need more though, don't we?
Absolutely.
We're like starved for our Latinx, right? Animation, cartoons. We need that stuff. We need our songs. We need everything. We need the joy as well as the dirty laundry. Because it seems like it's always the dirt, the grime, right? That gets shown, that represents us. But we want the joyful stuff too. What else? Latinx culture, pop culture, yeah.
I may get in trouble, but guilty pleasure was Acapulco, the series Acapulco.
Oh, your guilty pleasure was the series Acapulco. Okay, why guilty pleasure?
Well, it just seems like very superficial, but they do attack a lot of cultural stereotypes and assumptions, and because it's set in the 80s.
Okay, well just remember, you are in a safe
Thank
space.
you.
This is actually a whole thing, and my whole life is about pop culture, right? I wrote books on Robert Rodriguez after all, right? So yeah, you are safe in this space. Any others? Any others? Yeah. Desperado. Well, there you go. Robert Rodriguez, Desperado. And why Desperado for you? Just because it kicks ass? Basically, right? Yeah. You know, it's amazing. Robert Rodriguez, he was one of the first to systematically, basically put a plan into play, a strategic plan that allowed folks like Salma Hayek, others to cross into Hollywood, right? He didn't go full frontal, but he had a big long-term plan. And now look, Danny Trejo, everywhere, right? Wow, that is pop culture doing work, right? Transformative work. What else? What else? Anything else? One of the things that is really important to my work is not just picking the kind of low-hanging fruit of negative representation, because there is a lot of that, right? I'm going to get into a little bit more in a second. There is a lot of garbage out there that does pretend to reconstruct the Latinx experience, that gets it willfully wrong, right? But then we also have to keep in mind that we are not passive, absorptive sponges, right? So yes, we want to call that stuff out, and we are not letting anybody off the hook, right? And we are celebrating the stuff that does get it right. But at the same time, we have to recognize the fact that we are not, our brains, our bodies, our beings are not just passively absorbing this stuff. This is important because that's where recreation, creators, Latinx, BIPOC, all come in, right? We're not just sitting back, sitting on our hands and waiting for stuff to happen to us, okay? So if there's anything that we take from some of the information, from some of the slides today, it's that. To feel empowered and to know that we are active transformers of the world that we live in. A little bit of biography here, because of course that is really important. It shapes our research interests, it shapes pretty much everything that we do, right? If you really think about it. I am like of both sides of the border in a really weird way. My mom, when she was 18, had heard all these stories about Guatemala and all of her family there. But my Irish-American grandfather, who, as it turns out, was a real bigot, didn't want my grandmother to share those stories openly at home with my mom and her sister. So the second she could, she got on a bus and headed down to Guatemala to meet family. She got off in Mexico City. Man, first fell in love with the city and then fell in love with my dad. Okay. I was born in Mexico City to a Guatemalan Irish American and Chilango Mexican papa. Okay. Things didn't quite work out. We headed back to Califas, to California. I was about 5. But there was something in the kind of water that I was drinking. My mom recognized that when we were coming home from elementary school, I told not to speak that dirty Mexican, right? That the system didn't want Mexicans, right? That it didn't want to educate, it didn't want to open those doors. So she, as a single mom, put herself through Sacramento State, got herself her education, bilingual degree, and devoted her life, right, to elementary school education, right, to try to make a difference. My dad stayed back in Mexico. We would get letters. He became a super huge force in the socialist movement in Mexico City. Having lost friends in the big massacre that happened in the big plaza there in Mexico City, and really kind of galvanizing force, working with the Fourth International to push against systems of oppression, right? Exploitation. So there was something like in the air for me. It's almost like my destiny had been decided, right, when I was 5 years old. Somehow I'd become an educator, but everything that I wanted to do would somehow turn back to community, to opening, right? So even with the scholarship and the books, always, right, with this in my rearview mirror. At Berkeley, and it wasn't an easy path to get there, but when I did finally get to Berkeley, I was, as many of us, I don't know, hold your hands up, who have been told, like, no, art isn't for you, you gotta be an engineer, you gotta be a doctor. Yeah, right. Because that's what our parents, that's what they see in the media, right? As the way to make, push forward, make it, get things ready for family and so on. I hated it. I was in pre-med the first year and it was like, oh God, at Berkeley, it's like literally 1,000 people in this classroom in OCHEM. And you could barely see the professor. In contrast, I had a comparative literature course in the mornings. And there were 7 of us. Good reason for me to get up every Tuesday and Thursday. I love that course. And I'm like, how do I become that person, that professor? And I asked her, Tamsin Bomar, how do I become you? Because I didn't know how you would, do this thing. I didn't know you had to go get a PhD and all that stuff, but I did. I fell into the lap of really incredible scholars. Barbara Christian, the late Barbara Christian, incredible African-American scholar. By the way, just really quickly, Skip Gates at Harvard was just in the New York Times talking about all his cool stuff. And he didn't even mention all the black women that were doing the stuff before him. It made me so angry. And Barbara Christian was one of those scholars. So I fell into her lap, and I fell also into the lap of Alfred Arteaga, also the late Alfred Arteaga. And what I loved about them was this was a time when high theory, where you would go into classrooms and just talk theory and then fight theory with other theory. Okay?
That's me, I'm that person.
Are you a product of that?
Yes.
Yeah, so I walked into Barbara's classroom and we were suddenly talking about African American black women writers. And we were reading them and we were feeling and imagining with them and trying to articulate this. And that was it. I'm sold. If I'm going to be a professor, that's what I want to do. And so I did. I went on to Stanford, worked with Ramon Saldivar as a role model for myself, and powered through a literature PhD program, but always with an eye to film and eventually comics. Because back then, this was 93 to 99, me writing a dissertation on Latinx comics would have been you'll never get a job. And they were right. So I had to wait. So as a young professor at CU Boulder, published a bunch of books, not quite to 48 yet. And as soon as I made full, I started my research and writing in Latinx comics. Read this living, breathing archive Because guess what? Most of the comics are created by folks that are alive right now. So I'm like, that is my archive. I'm going to jump in there and I'm going to get everything I can out about this stuff. So now years later, bunch of books behind me. One on Robert Rodriguez, the one that some of you guys are reading, and I love what I do. I love writing and concept building, disseminating, sharing, right? Learning from all of you guys in articulating systematically like why this matters. And not just why it matters theoretically, why it matters in our lives in very material ways. So yeah, bunch of books behind me. Latinx pop cultural studies for me, right, is a way to expand our understanding of our active creation and active reception, right, of cultural phenomena. It's also a way to understand how we, as recreators, distill, strip down, kind of chew up, and then reconstruct in ways that make new our perception, thought, and feeling about this particular thing that we're interested and excited of putting into the world again. So yeah, there's something really dynamic about Latinx pop cultural studies for me. It's also significant and important in a world like today where we number something like around 19% of the population. So we are the majority historically underrepresented in this country. The majority historically underrepresented. I don't like the term minority. Historically underrepresented is a much more accurate term. We are very diverse within the Latinx community, right? We're not this homogenous thing. It's why Encanto is so important, why Coco is so important, why Book of Life is so important, and why we need more. And yet, right, there's gatekeeping. Anybody in education? Everybody's in education, we know this, right? What happens out of every 100 Latino kids in elementary school? Maybe we're lucky if 2 make it as undergrads graduating from a 4-year university. Gatekeeping, push out and locking the doors behind. That's the system that starts us into the world, and it's the system that ends up creating a very narrow band of folks that are finally in positions like mine, in positions like Cedric, others, creating, disseminating, making knowledge, etc. And we all know it should be everybody. Everybody should be included in this. It also helps us understand, not only is there gatekeeping at the top side, in Hollywood and TV industries, right, who's in the writing rooms for TV shows? You're like, hold on, this show, and I don't know if any of you have seen it, we're going to talk about it in a minute. The show Coyote, Michael Chiklis. Anybody see that? ABC came out, I don't know, a year ago or something. And you look at who's in the writer's room, and it's supposed to be like this, it was supposed to be this incredibly, like, remarkably revolutionary show about now we have a white guy who's making the border crossing for different reasons, etc. Yes?
I think that's a movie.
Coyote?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, there's a TV show as well. Yeah. And you look at who's in the writer's room, you look at the producer, you look at the creative person behind it, Taylor Sheridan, okay? And you're like, really? If you really want to do this right, I mean, it's like Coco, Disney, anyway. But they finally said, okay, yeah, maybe we should go talk to some Latinos. And maybe that way we got a better chance of getting this right. But yeah, that's exactly why. So we're 2 to 3% represented for all these different reasons. Gatekeeping at the top side, gatekeeping at the beginning of our lives, right? But we're here to start changing this. Historically, our Latinx communities have been blocked from access to knowledge, concepts, experience, the tools for the realization of all potentialities. and willfully absented from the US cultural imaginary. Willfully, okay? Willfully. We can no longer just say it's by accident. We're going to skip this one because we want to get straight into some of the good, juicy stuff. We have become habituated because to the kind of racist, racialized stereotyping that hits us every day, right? Automatic. It's like we don't take it in anymore. We don't like stop and think about it because it's everywhere. It's everywhere, right? And so we have, what do we have? We have, when my little girl was little, she asked about the South American Barbie doll. And when I went to buy it and I read the label on it, South American stunner, Amazonia Barbie doll emerging from the Amazon and ready to capture your heart. I'm like, hell no am I taking this one. Right? Of course I did. You know why? Because I know that little ones are way more creative and recreative than we give them credit. And yes, in fact, before I knew it, she had become decapitated. The clothing had been like repurposed on a collage that she was doing, right? All that cool stuff. And I'm like, yes. For people who like it sweet, spicy, and steamy. I mean, we can't even have hot chocolate. An abuelita on the hot chocolate advertisement without her getting spiced up, right? Seriously. So yeah, I mean, this is everywhere. It's everywhere, and we become habituated to it. But we need to stop and think about it and critically engage with it, right, in these ways, and that's why art is so important. Ethnic cleansing. There was an online video game, ethnic cleansing. You would score points the more border crossers you killed. Okay, this stuff is out there, and the more it goes unchecked, the more outrageous it goes, but the more people become habituated to it. Just let it pass. TV. Okay, so I watch way too much TV. Way too much. There's a lot to learn, though, from watching a lot of TV. And this is probably pretty obvious to most of you, right? The stereotypes that have gelled around us. The buffoon, the one that betrays, or combinations of those. Hypersexualized, right? Latinos. Always making tortillas, right? Seriously, like, don't we want more? Don't we want more? Don't we want like a range of complexities? I think we're all tired of seeing the same old thing. I was really happy to see J-Lo on Shades of Blue, and then you find out that Harley Santos, the character she plays, is all of the above. Hypersexualized, right? She betrays the force. She's like got some like drug thing going on. She's like peddling this and that. You're like, okay, here we go again. But let me just show you this. It's not just, people like Sofia Vergara, and we all know she gets the whole thing. She gets picked on a lot, rightfully so, right? If you hear her in interviews, and if you've seen her before she stepped into this role, as Gloria, her accent wasn't quite as exaggerated. She actually had blonde hair, et cetera, right? But it's everywhere, right? So anybody see this latest James Bond? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Ana de Armas, and I love Knives Out. Anybody see that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, wasn't that good? Mm-hmm. On so many levels, that was so good. And I loved at the end when like legacy whiteness was completely troubled, right? And she had the power to determine that future. Yes, right? But here's a little clip. Maybe we can dim the lights. I don't know if anybody, or I can dim the lights.
Oh, was I supposed to? I was supposed to do it.
We can do this one more time.
Here, I know how to do it. I just forgot to. I'm not the tech person.
Oh, okay. It's right here. Simple.
Is that working? Sorry, interrupting.
Technical.
Hello?
You're late. Vamos.
Paris,
Susie, I forget things when I get her. This is the biggest job ever.
it's your room?
The one thing.
Can we tell me this little bit before we,
No. No, I'm great.
I don't know what's going on there. It's so X-rated, I have to like censor that. I'm just joking. Yeah. Okay. Basically, look. Okay, so she's a Cuban secret agent, and she's like, I don't know. Let's hear it from the people who've seen this movie. Like, what did you do when you saw Ana de Armas cast and the way she was scripted in this role? Anything? Did you have any reaction?
I think what disturbed me the most was her dress.
Her dress. Why?
Because I love her, and I loved her in Knives Out, and she brought a breath of fresh air to the film, but I just thought, why did they have to put her in a dress where her breasts were falling out, while she is clearly meant to be, like, kicking ass with James Bond the whole time? Like, she had, literally, why put her in clothes at all? What was the point?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was-
Absolutely. And like somehow, and you know what's weird? Kari Joji Fukunaga, the director, like he's done some kick-ass stuff.
Yeah.
Like Sin Nombre is one of like my top films to teach. There's, it's an extraordinary movie. He spent 2 years down there with the Mara, right? And he survived, and then he made this movie. And it's a completely unsentimental, right, story journey of La Bestia and like immigration. And then we get this. You're like, how did this happen? Totally like falling into the stereotypes. Anything else that anybody wants to mention? Also that she, she's like kind of fumbling, she's fawning, she's, like, she's a secret agent, damn it. Like,
Yeah,
come on,
Exactly.
right?
Well, only for 3 weeks, though.
Only,
As
that's
she
right.
tells us.
Only for 3 weeks. Okay, so I'm gonna try and close this off again, and we're gonna watch this. Oops.
Look, I'm sorry you crashed, man. I tried to warn you. I don't want to talk about it. Okay. Look, man, just real quick. I wasn't trying to embarrass you. We all have sex issues. I haven't slept with my wife in a year. But when people have over-sexualized behavior like yours, sometimes that's evidence of past childhood trauma. And I just wanted you to feel safe.
There's been no trauma, okay? And my goal in life isn't to feel safe talking to you. What I do and how many times I do it in the bathroom, that's personal, okay? That's my business. That's not our business.
I'll stay out.
Okay, so this is Chips. Anybody see the film remake of Chips? Okay, I'm sorry you saw that movie. Okay, so I love Michael Pena. I think he's like one of the our great actors, right, today. But what do? You recreate this character who is a compulsive masturbator. That's how he's characterized. That's his identity throughout the narrative, right? And of course, here we have Sam, the director, telling him like, "There's something, you've got a problem." So it's not just we're used to calling it out with Latinas and the hypersexualization, and we need to continue to do that. But it also happens all the time with the Latinos, right? This is the white regenerative narrative that I was talking about with the TV show. And this is Michael Chiklis. And if you look at some of the publicity around this show, it was like, this is going to revolutionize because we got the Border Patrol, who's a racist, he's a white guy, and somehow, through circumstance, he's going to end up on the other side of the border and have to cross the border as an undocumented. Okay, then we watch it. And yeah, it's a total like loser white dude, right? Shit out of luck guy. We're used to seeing a lot of that. And as the show unfolds, we realize that it's one of these, what I call white regenerative narratives through Brown. Okay, so he loses everything, estranged from daughter, divorced, everything. Couldn't get any worse. But because he stumbles into a situation involving the migration, the undocumented migration of a Latina, and then he becomes her savior, there's this whole like metaphor around the burning down of a house that he's been taking care of, and then the reconstruction of the house and him through his journey with this Latina. Right? And in fact, Clemens, his very name, and this I'm sure was not, not purposeful, is clemency and mercy in the end, right? So it's not just white savior, it's white regenerative that we're seeing. And we have it everywhere. Ozark, right? Better Call Saul, Breaking Bad, Cry Macho. Oh my God. Anybody? Man, you are like all over the film. I love it.
Me and my parents, we watched Cry Macho about this much. Like in the first half, and then we shut off.
Yeah. Okay, there comes a limit. How old is Clint Eastwood?
Oh, 180.
180. Okay, I'll take that. And somehow the Latina that runs a coffee shop in this small town is like magnetically attracted to him. Okay, so yeah, this is like the most extreme point of the white regenerative narrative. But yeah, we're seeing it everywhere. Cobra Kai. And I am excited to see the Latino actor. Apparently he's been cast to be one of my Latino superheroes. But yeah, so same thing, right? Down and out white guy, meets Miguel, regenerative narrative, romances the mom, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, we're tired of this stuff. And the white savior stuff of Zack Snyder, right? His Superman stuff, and anyway, anything Zack Snyder does pretty much. So let's just watch this little moment here.
On this planet have been looking for a savior. 90% of people believe in a higher power, and every religion believes in some sort of messianic figure.
Okay, so that's Man of Steel. Anybody remember that moment? Okay, so in both Man of Steel and Batman Superman, we see all of two Latinos. In Batman v Superman, you have a gas station attendant and then a soldier. Okay, and the huge world of Superman. In this one, somehow Superman is in Metropolis, even though there's this high-tech kind of alien invasion stuff going on, and he feels compelled to fly across the border to Juarez to save a little girl from a burning building because why? We can't. That's the message that's being sent. And then, of course, it just happens to be Day of the Dead. Right? That's what I'm talking about. We need to wake up to the fact that this is happening to us all the time. The cultural imaginary, right, is shaping the way we think of ourselves even, right? The way people see us. The way people see us as helpless and in needing saving, right? Brown face optics continue, right? In the space of superhero comics, for me, I was really excited and happy that Shazam in its New 52 makeover got a Latino family, and then in the film version, what do? They cast as Rosa a Spaniard. Okay, it's continuing to happen. It used to happen with Penelope Cruz, but it's still happening today. Okay, Sicario, right? Anybody? Our friend over there. What's your name? Santana. Yeah. Okay. So Anything disturbing about Sicario and Sicario 2? I mean, besides all of the violence, the blood, the bodies falling out of the walls. Yeah, yeah. Well, apparently a journalist did their job and realized that in some of our former presidents' speeches, that in fact they weren't really based on anything real, and they did this kind of one-to-one correspondence between what happened in Sicario 2 and what was being broadcast across our airwaves in terms of the representation of those wanting to cross the border. So where they tie up women and put duct tape on mouths and put them in the back seat of a car or a van, we've even found prayer rugs out here. We need the wall, Donald Trump. And this journalist is like, yeah, he's been watching Sicario. It's dangerous, right? It matters. It matters because it can lead and does lead to that kind of policy, to that kind of, the kind of tribalism that we've been seeing of late, right? Extreme tribalism. White optic Latinx is what I've been calling a lot of this representation, or rather misrepresentation, that's ignorant, shameful, destructive, and I'll just call it for what it is, racist. Okay, not everything is doom and gloom, like I said. The brown optic that I'm talking about and that I like to spend my time also working on does wake us to a mainstream that aims to condition us to accept negative stereotypes, to cut through the racist, sexist, queerphobic narratives that create an illusion of a natural order in things. And this is happening with all of our creatives, like, for instance, Lalo Alcaraz. When Disney tried to patent Day of the Dead, or trademark it, right? Lalo was like, what the? And so he created a campaign, the Muerto Mouse campaign, galvanized enough resistance solidarity around this that it caught the eye of Disney, and they backed off. They were smart too with Coco. Not instinctively, but at a certain point someone was like, you better get this right, and so they started to call in people like Lalo as consultants in the writing of the narrative of Coco. There was a moment, for instance, if you look at some of the original script, when the abuelita threw a spoon, right, at Miguel, and didn't have her chancla, and Lalo's like, no, this spoon isn't really, like, we gotta change that, right? And it made a difference, because when we see it, when we're watching it, like, yeah, those little tiny pieces, those little details make a difference, and they matter. In front and behind the camera. So now we're starting to see, through grassroots efforts, we're starting to see writers, folks, executive producers, people in front and behind, right? Creating the stuff that we're being able to, see. But of course, one day at a time, what happens? Super popular, then they cancel it. Social media gets like on top of this, and fortunately, brings it back for us. Same thing that happened with Hinterfight, right? So we have to keep fighting as we have been fighting. But it does make a difference.
I just came out with Juanita. You did? And I think it's beautiful. You do? Glad when I accepted immediately? No questions asked. Well, that is great.
Miss Alvarez, you have the coolest family. I'm gonna call my grandma. Maybe she's finally ready to hear that I'm vegan.
I'm gonna Skype Herman and tell her the awesome news.
So what I love about, not only it's being really smart writing and that we laugh, is that we're laughing with and not at. And the big difference with Modern Family is that we are being asked to laugh at, right? And of course, the punchline, the jokes are directed, the white kid, he's the one that we're laughing at. And it's okay. We can do that because he's a white guy, right? He can handle it. And so when he's like, yeah, I'm gonna tell my grandma I'm vegan, we laugh. So if you put that up next to something like Modern Family, we have come a long ways. This is, this reconstruction distillation concept that I was talking to you about is happening in movies, and I'm gonna show you a little bit here from La Mission, Peter Brad. And this is when Che, the father, finds out that his son is gay. Oh geez, can't really see. Okay, well he's looking at some Polaroid pictures and he's getting really angry, upset, and his son is asleep. And yes, you can kind of get an idea. And then there's a whole journey that happens, and he comes to the realization that his own internalized machista violence is actually tied to the community's violence and the death that just happened. And what's extraordinary about this moment in La Mission is that Peter Bratt, with Benjamin Bratt acting here as the father, we are allowed to not just experience what it means to live with the machista dad, but also to see how the machista dad comes into a self-awareness of his own violence toward his son. And it happens in and through the danza azteca, which ties us to pre-Columbian ritual and a cosmology that was accepting of two-spirit identities, right? So it wasn't this Western sense of straight versus queer. It was a time of cosmology where we had the acceptance of two spirits. So this is a really extraordinary moment, a willful reconstruction of a part of our lives. So yeah, that's just to give you an idea. The flute, the rain, the transformation, the catharsis that happens in this scene, quite extraordinary. And of course, we all love Book of Life. Book of Life. If you want to come in, come on in. Or if you're just, it's up to you. Book of Life. I love Book of Life. Yeah, I love Book of Life. Anybody see Book of Life?
Yeah.
Yeah, did you like it?
Yeah.
The animation, everything. So it's not just the story that we want to make new. We want like the texture of the way the story is shaped. Yeah. Yeah, I'll tell you what, this is my like deep dark secret. I actually like it better than Coco. Yeah. Yeah, and this is Jorge Gutierrez, and what I love about this is that literally
Center of the universe. And long ago,
Mexico is the center of the universe.
quaint little town of sun and hand. Since sun and hell was the center of the universe, directly below it lay the land of the remembered, a festive and magical place for those who live on the memories of their loved ones.
So he's the children here, the ideal audience that's constructed are the detention kids, right? I spent time in detention, a lot of time in detention, right? And they're given this magical other way of entering into the institution of the museum. And it's in this other door, this portal, this magical portal, right, that they learn the history of Mictlan. They learn like that they themselves matter. That's the audience that I'm interested in, right? I'm interested in the kids that have been told they don't belong, right? And this movie puts them front and center. The comic books that I love, some of them, here's one, Rodi Montijo, his Pablo's Inferno. Comics shape in different ways to animation, just like animation give shapes to stories in different ways to TV, etc. And you can see here when my little one was little, what was kind of extraordinary to me is that when they're about this age, their heads are huge. And I couldn't believe that this little body could support this gigantic head. But you see what happens with comic book creators, they're distilling and reconstructing, and they're using this kind of thing that we've become habituated to. Like when you see little ones, there's this kind of almost automatic way that we care, right? There's empathy for them. And part of it is the big eyes and the big head. So what does he do? He's like, I'm gonna create a character with a big head and the big eyes, and automatically, shorthand way, you're gonna empathize with this character. The only difference is that this character gets squashed and killed in the first page. Pablo gets squashed and killed. But what's beautiful about it is that we follow him on his journey through Mictlan, and he meets Quetzal in the underworld. And Quetzal, a kind of superhero way, teaches him all about our pre-Columbian past. And the story ends with Pablo restoring harmony to his community. The rain comes and the harvest can happen. Beautiful, right? This is a comic book. We do all of this with a little character like that. In the more mainstream spaces, Gabi Rivera's America Chavez. Anybody read comics? Okay, a couple of you. Yeah, this is amazing, right? That Marvel, we get a queer superhero, America, and she punches like holes between different solar systems, different planets. In other words, she's like someone who opens borders, right? Instead of building walls, she opens them. And what I love is that she finally, at the end of the journey, she battles the foes and overcomes evil with her abuelita fighting next to her. Beautiful, right? This is one of my little comics, and it could have been very different for me. And I'm trying to figure out, see if I can do the pointer. Right, so here, this is me, and it's evening, lots of things kind of telling us the story, more showing than telling. I want to go out because my buddy, Miguel, and his older brother were like, hey, let's go out, and I'm like, no, I better stay home, but I want to go out, looking out the window. And if I had gone out, I would have ended up in juvie hall. Because his older brother held up the 7-Eleven. Yeah. Right? But you know what? This is the story for many of us. Like even today, I've got this really cool gig at UT Austin. In many ways, I'm Latinx, like white passing, right? And yet, almost every day, there's a moment when I trip, or I look the wrong way, or I say the wrong thing, and it can all be taken away, right? So it's not just me as a 16-year-old. It's something that we face and that we see in our rearview mirrors and then experience on an everyday level, where no matter how much you've done, it doesn't matter, right? It can be taken away just like that. One of my other comics, it's told from the point of view of a little one crossing the border, who's put in the ICE detention cage, separated from her little brother and her mother. And, the trauma of little ones being put in these situations. And the only thing that gives her comfort is this very plasticky, kind of hard plastic Dora doll that one of the immigration officers gives her, pulling the scratchy blanket up over her and trying to find comfort in this little doll. And yes, Chupacabra Charlie. And guess what? Chupacabra Charlie is vegan. And the person I worked with, Chris Escobar, who was doing the illustration, he first did Chupacabra Charlie with fangs. And I'm like, dude, he doesn't eat meat. He doesn't need fangs, right? He's also super educated. That's just a little teaser, but yeah, this goes back to my point. We're not just sitting around, sitting on our hands. We're actually doing things. And we're putting stories out there. When I went to the library with my little girl, when she was little, she's 15 now, and I was looking for books like this, and they weren't there. We did have a couple, And it was always the abuelita in the kitchen making tortillas with the little girl, right? With the niña. And I'm like, I love those, but I also, where are the dads? Where are our folkloric, mystical mythologies, right? I want more of those things, but we're not waiting around for it. We're doing it, right? We're not waiting for someone else to do this work. And yeah, guess what? Kids can handle it. They can have a story that hinges on an adventure where Charlie and Lupe free the kids from the cages. Why not? You know, and then why not talk to your kid when you're reading the story with them about what's happening along the border, right? And what you can do. Con Papa, as Penny had mentioned, I'm so excited about this. And of course, it's like 15 years too late because my kid's 15. But yeah, I really wanted the story to follow the dad, and even there's a moment where the grandfather's in the picture, and this little one, and the journey, right? Setting this little one off on their journey. And they're non-binary, which I think is really important, especially for little ones like that. Latinx superheroes, Penny mentioned the documentary, which was really exciting for me.
I started looking for characters that were not sidekicks. They're not the side story.
A culture that I'm a part of sometimes misses the point. Latino comics in Latin America tend to be more white.
Being a Latino who's drawing it, it's a Latino thing. I can draw a fire hydrant, it's still a Latino do that.
The Latin lover stereotype.
The whole town's lazy and drunk and all that other stuff.
A lot of times I feel like I'm not female enough.
We're adding diversity. You've got a Mexican guy with a religion like that.
I think it's made some serious strides with African American characters and LGBTQ characters, that there still is not enough representations of people of that descent.
Communities need to see themselves in the media they consume. There's Dominican, there's Puerto Rican, there's Mexican, there's Nicaraguan, it's just all over the place.
The most exciting thing about right now is knowing that there are superheroes that are being written for everyone.
Oh, the future is just limitless.
So this is just a little plug here. Next week, Thursday and Friday, I do have my BIPOC Pop, my first big event at UT Austin, and I'm flying in creatives, industry people, and scholars to basically do what we've been doing today. To share work, but also to network, to open doors for one another, and to meet with students, to show, to role model K through 12 as well as, right, those on campus. Really important to create these spaces as well as to talk about them. That's the BIPOC Pop poster. And creating critical, creative collaboratories, situations where we're bringing Black, Indigenous, Asian, others together to create together, right? Because it's in solidarity that we can actually and do make a difference. So yeah, as we kind of close this lecture, this talk, don't we all Latinxes, everybody deserve the right to develop fully ideas of ourselves today and tomorrow, right? Ideas of ourselves today and tomorrow. To grow and realize dreams of becoming educators, researchers, all else. To grow and realize our counterfactual, our imaginative, our hypothetical capacities in the form of comics, picture books, TV, video games, film, and anything yet to be discovered and imagined. Thank you.
Well, we have plenty of... I wasn't planning on that. Okay. We have plenty of time for questions. I will let you, do you want to field
Yeah,
them?
sure.
Yeah, I'm sure there are plenty of questions. That was thank you so much for such an engaging and wide-ranging talk. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Or is
so
it-
this is, no, I'm really glad you brought that up. So for some of you who've seen this, you remember the new 007, right? And who is the new 007? Anybody? Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry?
Daniel Craig.
Not Daniel Craig,
Yeah,
a black woman,
Yeah.
right? But what happens there is the journey, the narrative, she's given enough bandwidth, breathing room, where we go in expecting the same kind of business as usual. The object that is used and discarded because of their encounter in the bar, and they flip the narrative. Totally flip it on us. But our Latina's not given that opportunity. So it's kind of going back to that black-white thing. It's like, we need that breathing room as well, and it hasn't happened yet. So yes, Black Lives Matter, Brown Lives Matter, etc., and we are supportive of it, but we want to make sure that we're not just focused on the black woman character as revising radically the paradigm, right? How nice, how cool would it have been to have had Ana de Armas also given more of that possibility? And you could argue maybe possibly that when she finally does kick ass as a secret agent who's obviously trained more than 3 weeks, that she does do that. But everything up to that moment there's the breathing time of the narrative is so much that it overwhelms anything that they may have tried to do to undo that, right? In the latter part of her existence in the narrative. So that's how I would say that. And of course it means you have to watch the James Bond. Other comments or questions? Yes?
I was wondering how you feel about Encanto and Coco and how they represent like Latinx culture, especially because they both seem to have like that same storyline of the younger generation going against the matriarch of the family.
Yeah, so I actually like both. I actually would have liked more of Encanto. I felt like the narrative all just started to get going and then was kind of, collapsed. But my easy, quick answer to that question is we just need more. We need more because until we have more, then we will be jumping all over what the one doesn't get right. We can celebrate and be critical when we have more to celebrate and be critical of, right? But it's like in the heights, right? So, I wrote a piece about that because for the first time I actually felt deep joy. Like I laughed, I cried, I did all those things, the kinds of things even that I did with Coco and stuff. But of course, I found fault with its, LGBTQ representation. Others found fault with its representation of, lights, saying it's all light-skinned Latinos being represented, etc. And it's well, hold on, let's step back a second. Maybe we should be focused, yes, we should be talking about that, but let's focus our energies on making sure that we have more being made. More from all the different communities. Colombian, Encanto, right? Mexican, Boricua, right? Dominican. Where's our Dominican story? We had Oscar Wilde, and then what? That's it. So yeah, my simple and straightforward answer is that when you have 19% representation of Latinos in this country, when you walk out your door in most parts of this country, including, by the way, Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, the fastest growing population in Columbus, Ohio is Latinx. How can you not distill and reconstruct in your art, in your stories that are inclusive of Latinos, of all kinds, of every background, of all of our different experiences and communities? And that's why it's the willful erasure that we're seeing more and more blatantly today. So yeah, let's put our energies into fighting for more space behind and in front of the camera. Another comment. Oh, yes, sorry.
No, I was gonna ask you about the colorism controversy in the Heights, but we have been, in my class, we have been talking about representations, but yesterday we looked at some clips from the new West Side Story. And so I have sort of a two-part question. You know, I mean, there's been much celebration of Spielberg's, you know, sort of revision and, you know, of the 1961 version. So I wanted to ask your opinion on the film, but then I also wanted to think about, you know, is it a problem that, so In the Heights gets kind of piled on for all of the things it gets, it omits really. It gets a lot right, but then it seems to omit stuff. But then it's sort of like, you see West Side Story, and it's such an old story that's, again, you know, being rebooted, and so I just wonder about that, how you feel about things like that.
Yeah, so there again, like this kind of goes back to the last comment, which is, honestly, when I heard Spielberg was doing a remake, I'm like, you know, why not spend those millions of dollars actually making something new? Like adding something that we haven't seen before. Seriously, like, do we really need another West Side Story? Do we? No, I don't think so. If my opinion matters, no, let's not. Let's not do that. Let's spend all that money, energy, effort, and do something cool and new. So that would be one quick answer. The other part is that Tony gets way too much. It's again like the breathing room in the narrative and the way it sucks the air out of the Latinx characters in the Spielberg remake. Okay, so the white guy gets the breathing room, he gets all kind of more of the backstory and the justification and the understanding, and then the Latino characters continue to walk in front of the camera as cardboard cutouts. Okay. The first one, there was a remarkable moment in the first one when, for me anyway, thinking about the era that it screened, when you have the Jets in a situation, a trigger situation for us, what we call today, basically raping Anita, gang raping, the Latina. Holy crap. And what's crazy in the Spielberg version is, so that for me was a moment of, because if you look at something like Touch of Evil, typically you have it's the Latinos who are doing that with the white women. So when I saw West Side Story, I was blown away in a positive way. Like, wow, like here we have, of course it's working class, but it's still a working class white gang. And it's not being depicted in a way that you can brush off. And then in the Spielberg version, anybody see the Spielberg version? Yeah, so what happens in the Spielberg version?
Well, they mess around with her, but they don't take it to a full extent that they raped her. Basically, Rita Moreno's character comes in at the last moment to stop them.
Yeah, so there's a kind of a weird moment there. Maybe Spielberg was thinking, like, victim of rape. In this weird kind of star world of Hollywood, let's get Rita in as the older, like, victim, even though it's not a neat, right? The personage stopping something that happened to her when she was playing that role.
Yeah.
But it honestly doesn't have the same, like, moment of absolute kind of repulsive reaction that I had with the original. It's smoothed over, and it's almost as if she's asked for it in the Spielberg version. I don't know if you got that, but the way, the situation, it's like she put herself in it's the same old crap.
Because she's trying to save Tony.
Yeah. And so for me, it was a huge disappointment. If there's anything that I would like kind of punch in on, it would be the comparing and contrasting these two moments. This is also an important thing to keep in mind, that progress isn't necessarily teleological, right? That is to say, just because we are in 2021 doesn't mean things necessarily are better than in 1960, 61, okay? And that there are ruptures that happen when you have willfully reconstructed stories by creatives that want to wake you, perception, thought, and feeling systems to situations like this. And so I would say that this is one of those. Yeah.
I know you've touched on this in your work. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about Love and Rockets and its position in, I don't know if we even want to keep on using the word canon anymore, but in the archive of Latinx comics, and what's so important about them, and why should maybe younger people today who weren't around when they were being created, maybe they want to seek it out?
Yeah, anybody familiar with Love and Rockets, Jaime and Gilbert Hernandez? Okay, so yeah, you guys definitely, when you're done here, go online, order up a bunch of their stuff. In 1981, they were the first Latinos to come out of, into the comics world and to bring these narratives that were both about our community, based in Oxnard, California, but also other kind of youth in that space. So, kind of punk rock scene, Latinos, queer Latinos, straight Latinos, all sorts, right? Old, young, etc. And what was remarkable about their narratives, their stories, is that they told them as huge story arcs. So you would follow them almost like in time, in real time, these characters aging and changing and evolving and so on. So for me, I didn't get to them until I was in college. I'll be honest, in high school, I pretty much, all I did was try to study to kind of get through and get out. But in college, I was reintroduced to the Love and Rockets. But let me say this generally about Love and Rockets and their story. If we did not have Jaime and Gilbert Hernandez, we would not have the biggest independent alternative comic book publisher in this country, Fantagraphics. But guess what? Nobody knows that. When we talk about independent and alternative comics, I hate to say it, but we think about like white guys. But guess what? Without Gilbert and Jaime, we wouldn't have the brick and mortar Fantagraphics, because they were so successful that they grew this tiny little garage-styled publishing company into the massive publisher it is today in Seattle. Yeah, did you have?
Well, you talked about boundaries and how you should approach boundaries going beyond certain constraints to actually target certain stereotypes. So I was at this Super Bowl party and everybody's white, everybody's super nice, and somebody asked me, "Where are you from?" Well, I'm from here. But where are you really from? As if I'm some exotic animal or whatever.
Yeah.
And my mom is white, so
Yeah.
I told them that my mom is white. They were like, "How is your mom white and you're like this?" As if like my mom is like a lion or my dad is like some exotic animal that they made it together or whatever. And so how do you want to approach these? Because it seems like these stereotypes are embedded within the psyche of people. They don't know it. Like these people are really nice. They don't have any bad intentions. How do you want to approach these kind of stuff? Because if you don't want to approach it here in the academia, it's going to overflow. It's going to go to the streets.
Yeah, no, we have to approach it here for sure. But let me just say this. The amount of times all of us have had that, right? And now we've actually got a term for it, right? We call it microaggressions. We didn't have those terms when I was growing up. We need them, right? We need those concepts and terms to be able to identify what's actually happening to us on an everyday level. So yeah, where are you from? And you're like, what the where are you from? Right? Where are you from? When you're in a big lecture like this, and what's your name? What's your name?
My name?
Yeah.
Imran.
And the topic of diversity comes up because it's the 1 week we're given in this, right? Big syllabus. Imran, tell us about diversity. You've got, you're in the hot spot right now.
Well, I am all about diversity. White, black.
I know. But why are you the one having to be put on the spot to educate the rest of everybody in the audience? Right? Why is that the automatic assumption? It's the same thing. Where are you from? Yeah. So that moment is you flip it and you turn it back. Where are you from? No, but where are you from?
Yeah.
No, come on. Where's your mom from? Right? Keep going. Keep pushing it to the absurd. And then that's when you're like, what the hell? Why are you Be cognizant of your actions, be cognizant of your behavior, and then begin to decolonize. Right? And guess what? It's in that moment, in those moments with that person that you're standing in front of, possibly listening, real listening happens. Possibly we open to vulnerability. And that's when understanding, and that's when change happens. Yeah.
Have you seen the film End of Watch before I ask my question?
Yes.
Okay, for anyone who hasn't
End
seen
of
it,
Watch.
there might be a spoiler because my question's about that. So beware, plug ears. Because I know it does demonize the Latinx community, but you were talking about white saviors, and that's what made me think of it, because in the end, Michael Peña's character is the one who saves him. Is that problematic because he dies saving the white man?
Yes. Okay.
If Jake Gyllenhaal would have saved him, then that would have been a white savior, but then because the situation's flipped, does that make it any better? But in the entire film, all of the Latinx characters are pretty much demonized. Even the one who's a police officer, she's made to be more aggressive than the other female police officers.
Sure. Okay. How many times have we seen a story, read a story, seen a story where it's the brown and black person who serves the function of holding up, and I'm putting in big quotes here, mammy style, the white character? How many times do we see that? It's everywhere, right? So the big question with something like Michael Peña is, when you're given a role like this, because, I in an interview just recently with Stephanie Beatriz, I asked her, you were brought into Modern Family as Gloria's sister, and the character you play is an absolute gold digger from Colombia. That's her character. And I'm like, how could you do that? She's like, I had to pay the bills. I was not in a position where I could say no. So then I said, was there any room for you when you decided to take this role to pay your bills to maybe insert something here that might subvert for an audience other than the one that this show is being made for? So then you have to go back and look. And honestly, if you look at most of Michael Peña's stuff, even the stuff where he's being asked to serve this function that's very stereotypical, that's denigrative, you see something, a glimmer of something else happening. And that's the genius of Michael Peña. There's another question up there. Yeah.
You gave us a lot of great words today, but 4 words really got me. Kids can handle it.
Yes.
Now, there are people in the state legislature who is going against that. The past 2 years, I've been working on a Native Studies course for high schools, but more relevant to your presentation, the Mexican American Studies course for high school students is being reviewed this year
we should be scared here too, right? The way critical race theory is being kind of bandied about and used in a way that has nothing to do with anything. We teach the full scope of our histories, our cultures, our literatures, and somehow that becomes critical race theory. How did that happen? Yeah, so it's there, let me provide a kind of like quick analogy or something. I can wear a t-shirt to work, like a Che Guevara or something, right? And maybe my boss gets a little bit upset, or it has FU on it or something. And there is a certain resistance that's happening, but it's very on the micro level. I'm not saying it's not useful. It can be very useful. But then you start talking to staff and students, because everybody, once you start talking to them, realizes that your boss is a real jerk. And the boss above your boss is a real jerk. And that everyone actually, once you start talking to them, is being pushed around, bullied, exploited, and oppressed. Well then, let's get together. Let's shut it down. And then people listen. And that's the way this stuff happens. Right now, because of social media, there are few people who seem to have a huge voice. Few people who have an amplified voice. When there are many more of us who see this as not only nonsense, who see this as fundamentally taking away our right to learn, to understand, to generate knowledge, everything that we do. So we need to get together actively, right, and push against the few who are getting these huge amplified spaces right now. It's not just the one, it's the many. And if we don't see that, we're going to tomorrow wake up and we are going to see a very different place for us and our teaching and for our children and for their children. So yes, today is the day that we get together as a unified front and our voices together and show that the many is what counts. Yes?
So I got a lot from your presentation, and one of the things that you kind of pushed a lot was that we should create things, right?
Yeah.
But there's so many things that are just like in the way of creation, and it becomes kind of like a privilege to be able to do so. So what are some ways that, like, where creatives allowed to create and have control over their creations in the way that they can influence them? Where it's like, if I go to Netflix and I'm like, hey, can you do this show? They could be like, no, absolutely not. We don't want your position here.
Yeah, so really good question. You want to create, you want to put stuff out in the world that makes a difference. And how do you get there when there's still so many gatekeepers, so many people telling you no? One of the things, and the reason why I create all these different book series and do all the kinds of things that I do, is not just for me to be able to publish Chupacabra Charlie, but for someone like you to come along and say, oh, Frederick's got this series. I'm going to throw an idea his way. Let's see if we can make this happen. And it is happening. There are a lot more folks in TV now. There are a lot more editors, agents in like the big publishing spaces. There's a lot more organization that has opened and continues to open pathways. So it's definitely, we are seeing a difference, and a lot of that difference is exactly what I was talking about. People not just being like whiny about all the crap, but actually coming together and making, materially opening possibilities. Now there is a difference between a TV show and a comic book, right? TV show is a lot of money. Even the ones that you want to do here on campus, still a lot of time and a lot of money, a lot of people involved. You scale your creation back and you're a good writer, but you're not a good drawer, team up with a drawer. Make it happen, okay? And then start making sure to let people know that this is happening. The right people that will open those doors for you. So it's scale, but it's also not, this is gonna sound like cliche, but it's really not listening to the no's anymore because we don't have to. Yeah.
I'll preface this with last summer I wrote a kind of mini thesis of paper where I was covering the lack of diversity in the publishing industry because when I was younger I wanted to write books and things like that, but I noticed that I never found any authors that looked like me, so eventually I stopped. But now that I'm older, I'm going to. But like the paper I was writing, at first I was like, there's a lack of diversity, and then I noticed that there were the books out there, like there were people who were authors out there and things like that. But I have a question of like, what would be a good way to like start creating this diversity, or like, what would be like, let's say I wanted to make sure this happened more, what would be my next steps?
You come to BIPOC Pop 2022. Austin, next Thursday and Friday. And I'll give you some money for a hotel room. I'm not joking. If you want to come down. Okay.
Everyone's
Yeah.
coming now.
Yeah. That's the fine print. You have to share your room with everybody here. Yes, you had a question.
I'm still stuck on the who are you, because you caught me by surprise first, so I was like, I just walked in. But it made me start thinking, like, because I'm going to Mexico this weekend. I know you're tired of hearing me say it. But it's like when I'm here, I'm very Mexican American. I tell people, yes, I'm Mexican. I do the typical ballet folklorico, done it forever. But when I go visit family, there's like people from a bunch of different states. They're like, oh, who are you? And it's like, well, my name's Diana. I'm one of your nieces, great-great-granddaughters, whatever the heck I am. But I'm referred to as the American. So it's
yeah.
There, I'm the American. Here,
Yeah.
I'm Mexican.
Sure.
So I never know who I am because it's like it doesn't matter where I go. I'm one or the other, but I can somehow never be both.
Let me ask you this. What happens when you're in a panderia? What do you feel?
Hungry and at home.
Hungry and at home. And that's all that matters. Screw the rest of it. You know, people are going to tell us left, right, and center, family, people in general, the person that asks you who you are, whatever, right? You're this or that, or you can't be this or that. Screw that. How do you feel the second you walk into that bakery and you like suck up those smells? Right? That's you, right? And don't let anybody else tell you who you are. And that's it. That's all I have to say. You know, when I was at Berkeley as an undergraduate, I was too light-skinned to be in like Mecha and all that stuff, right? Even though I wanted to be. I'm like, I want to do this stuff. I want to learn and hear about me. But I was like, no, you're not Mexican enough, right? And eventually I'm like, you know what, screw this. I know who I am. I know I know who I am. So why am I listening to this crap, right? And it's by knowing and embracing who we are that we don't let people divide us from each other. Because in the end, isn't that what all that stuff is about? Dividing us from each other? Mm-hmm. And what better way to win and to divide us, right? When we don't have to be that way. All right, I think we're good.
Yeah.
So,
I'm
you guys were awesome. And I'll see you all on Thursday and Friday. And drinks on this guy.